Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another installment of the Big Ten Show, Washington edition today. And there's been a little bit of some stuff going on at the University of Washington. Not crazy, but just some minor news here and there. So we got Roman Thomashoff here, Sonny Verma, my co-host, per usual. Roman, do you want to go ahead and tell the people about where you're from, your show, plug your show, and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the co-host of the Locked On Huskies podcast, and then all my written work will be coming soon at Huskies Wire as part of the USA Today sports media group. So you can check that out over at huskieswire.usatoday.com. That'll be coming soon within the next week and a half, 2 weeks or so.
Awesome. Yep, and you can look him up on X and follow along with all of his stuff coming over there. It's pretty good stuff. So I've been kind of listening in to try to get a feel for what's going on with the whole Jedd Fisch stuff and the transfer portal turnover that's happening because of it. So, Sonny, how you doing today, man?
Justin, I'm good. I'm excited to have Roman on. He's probably had a really busy week, so I'm grateful he took a couple minutes out of his day to give us a talk.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and jump right into the big conversation. First off, we won't spend too much time on the Deboer. That stuff's been beaten to death, but just your overall, in the lead up to the Deboer news and it seemed to happen very quickly. What was kind of your overall feeling kind of as that process went on, and then when it happened, kind of what was the feeling, the overall feeling? I know in the Washington fan base it was a lot of panic, but what was your kind of perspective on that?
Yeah, so as it got started, it was, okay, that's really interesting. Of course, his name is going to be mentioned alongside guys like Mike Norvell, Dan Lanning, of course. And then the more that it went on, the more that all of these things kind of dragged out, it just was a steep decline. Everything went downhill rather quickly, I would say. And, as much as especially Oregon fans might want to say like, these guys all said no, I disagree with that sentiment. From everything that it looks like, it was Deboer the whole time, just from the way that Jimmy Sexton, his agent, played things. And just the more things dragged out, the more it's just like, oh, yep, this is kind of what's going to happen. I got a call from a source on Friday morning who's like, yeah, this feels like it's in the process of getting done. So just the more it dragged out, the more I was like, oh, Washington is going to need to be looking for a new coach here very soon. Probably already is doing so.
Yeah. And kind of like alluded to it, just everything happened so quick. All of a sudden he missed the meeting in the morning with the athletic director, Troy Dannon. And then, that was kind of the catalyst that really got the wheels turning on, the news coming out a little bit later in the day about, him being hired. Just, I don't know if you've had a second to think about this, but, as far as fit goes, do you think Alabama made the right move in hiring him, or do you think he was more of a Washington guy?
So that's a great question, because obviously you never want to be the guy that follows the guy at Alabama, right? Or I'm a huge Patriots fan. I love Gerard Mayo. Very excited about that. That's my quick Patriots tangent, where following Bill Belichick is not going to be easy for him. No. And you can say the same thing about Kalen Deboer at Alabama. And, everyone's going to have their own take about like, oh, well, of course, Nick Saban is going to have access to his program and access to all these different things that are going on, where that could go really well. That could also go really poorly. And I think that he's definitely going to be a good fit over there, because when you look at everything that he's done in terms of building a program, he did a really good job of building up Washington, where he developed some of the talented guys that were already on the roster, and then brought in really good portal pieces to supplement that. When you talk about Michael Penix, you talk about Dylan Johnson, Jabbar Muhammad, where he took the established pieces on the roster and turned them from promising players into stars and into superstars. And then just said, okay, this is what we need to do to make sure that we can upgrade and get to a national championship level. He did that as well. So from that standpoint, I think that he's a great fit. What I'm really, curious to see is on the recruiting front, where, of course, over the last couple of days, we've seen an exodus of some of their top players and some of their top commits, where now all of a sudden they're looking elsewhere. And that's what I'm really curious to see, what that's going to look like come, the end of this 2024 class, and especially into 2025, because with Washington, it was always, oh, hey, the 2025 class is going to be the big one. That's going to be the one where everyone's like, okay, yeah, this is where we're going to see what kind of high school recruiter he really is. And of course that didn't happen. So that's kind of what I'm really curious about, is how is he going to fit in there as a recruiter? Because we know how serious that is down at the SEC.
Absolutely.
So, Roman, what's kind of the mood right now in Seattle? Obviously, you guys have had a crazy hectic last month and a half, upsetting Texas in the playoff, and then obviously, making it to the national championship. The 2 years prior to Kalen coming in, you guys won 4 games and 3 games. And then Kalen comes in, you win 11 games. And this year it was 12 games, I think? 14 wins.
14 if you count, yeah.
Sure, 14, including the college football playoff. Now, obviously, like, you're talking about the roller coaster of all roller coaster rides,
Oh yeah.
Is this like the feeling that you have now? Have you had time to, settle in? What do you think 5-10 years from now, when you and fellow Husky fans are going to be thinking about the Kalen Deboer era? What do you think the mood is going to be? What do you think the vibe is going to be like?
So I sorry, I just want to add one quick caveat there, Sonny, when you talk about 2020, they went 3-1 that year, where you kind of could see what that might have looked like. Of course, with the abbreviated COVID season, they only played in 4 games. So the 3 wins is like a little bit, but your point is very valid, especially when we look at what happened during the 4-8 season. It was okay. Yeah, looks like there's some things to build on here. And then, going into that season, then they lose to Montana and everything was, oh yeah, this looks like it might not be good. They get blown out by Michigan and everything just kind of falls downhill from there. But then Kalen comes in, does all the right things, says all the right things, and kind of bolts at the first chance he gets. So there's going to be some appreciation, but I feel like a lot of what happens might depend on how his tenure at Alabama goes. If he does really, really well, maybe makes another national championship game, maybe wins one, gets to a couple college football playoffs, I think that there might be a little bit of disdain where it's like, yeah, you didn't want to stay around and do the same thing here at Washington. Whereas, let's say if things crash and burn, I feel like it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But if things go to the other extreme, I think Washington fans might be sitting around saying, really dodged a bullet there. Thank you for your time and everything. But I feel like it's going to end up being somewhere in the middle of there, but I can see it being somewhere towards either extreme, because the reaction over the last week or so since that happened has been overwhelmingly negative.
Yeah. And so moving forward into the Jedd Fisch stuff, what before the Fisch hiring, what was kind of as soon as the Deboer exit, what was kind of your quick wish list as far as coaches go out of the available coaches that they had?
Honestly, Justin, it was Jedd Fisch. It always was, where we put out an episode over on Locked On Huskies about that. And there were some other, I don't want to call them pipe dream candidates, where, Ryan Grubb was the name that a lot of people were excited about. And then you kind of look around at some of the other candidates where it's like, oh, Lance Leipold at Kansas, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. It's like, yeah, I can see that. And then the big kind of like pie in the sky one that people were looking at and still isn't necessarily, he's going to be around the program in some capacity, was Pete Carroll. After he got let go by the Seahawks, where it was, oh, hey, this could work out. This could be fun. We can see what he might be able to do with this. But especially after Jedd Fisch got introduced and we listened to Troy Dannon talk about him at his introductory press conference, it was Jedd Fisch, it was Jedd Fisch, and then the third choice was Jedd Fisch. So it was kind of always like, yeah, this is the direction that they wanted to go the whole time.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, that they were able to land the guy that they wanted, and didn't waver on that. They were confident they can go get him, and had a lot to do with the momentum. So there's a silver lining to the season, even though you end up losing your coach. But Sonny, go ahead.
So I guess, you obviously, being in the Pac-12, have had a up close and personal kind of viewing of Arizona football over the last couple of years. A program that's, for the better part of its history, is not very good. Jedd Fisch obviously has turned things around down there. If you were giving a scouting report on Jedd Fisch and what he did at Arizona and what you think can kind of translate, what makes you excited about him doing it at Washington, what would it be?
So I would say the number one thing is his ability to actually build up a roster, where the biggest complaint about Kalen Deboer leaving is, well, he kind of left this roster in shambles. Guys like Odunze, Michael Penix, the list, Braylon Trice, the list goes on and on and on of guys that left for the NFL draft. It was, he didn't necessarily do a great job of supplementing this through the transfer portal, through the ranks of high school recruiting. Whereas with Jedd Fisch, he took a 1-win team and turned into a team where we were kind of, behind the scenes when it was, are they going to play Oregon? Or are they going to play Arizona in the Pac-12 championship game? It was, would you rather see Oregon than Arizona? Like, is that was the conversation that I know a lot of people were having, because he did such a great job of just establishing a really good system on offense. Fantastic pro style mix of, as he said it himself the other day, Mike Shanahan, Sean McVay, all those kinds of guys. And then on the defensive side, just putting in a really, really solid system that went from one of the worst in the country to top 25 this past season, where just doing that on both sides of the ball through, mainly the high school recruiting ranks. And then because, especially with some of the budget constraints he might have had down there, now being able to supplement that through the transfer portal a little bit more, I would say that just his ability to build out a roster with fantastic NFL connections and some of the things he might be able to do with a bigger budget now in the Big Ten, I would say that would be the most exciting thing about Jedd Fisch.
Now, obviously Alabama's kind of been the big story because of the mass exodus on the team. Washington has lost a decent amount of players as well. Would you say that's just because they don't really fit the scheme, or are people just starting to play that NIL game?
So I don't think it has anything to do with either of those, to be honest with you. Or I think it might just be so as Washington sports information director tweeted out the other day, all that entering the transfer portal does is it means that the door is open. You don't have to step through it, but it just means the door is open. Sure, there'll probably be some guys who say, oh yeah, let me see what, I might be able to get NIL at other schools compared to Washington. There might just be some guys saying, I was really here because I really liked what Kalen Deboer was building. And without him, I don't know how I feel about it. So the situation is definitely unique from person to person to person. We've seen a lot of the offensive linemen hit the transfer portal. Scott Huff, the offensive line coach, who is probably going to be going down to Alabama with Kalen Deboer, was one of just the most beloved recruiters on that staff, just one of the most beloved developers on that staff. So that could be part of it as well. So no slight to Brendan Carroll, who I really like. I think is doing a really good job. Showed that he did a good job down in Arizona too, where I would say the situation is unique from person to person, but I wouldn't say that there's any one cause where it's okay. Yeah. Let's look at center Parker Brailsford, where he had a fantastic year as a redshirt freshman, did an unbelievable job all season long, where he might be able to say, okay, yeah, I didn't necessarily get a ton of offers out of high school. It was actually down to Washington or Jedd Fisch in Arizona for him when he committed. And, you can look at that and say, well, now, maybe Ohio State might be interested. Maybe Alabama might be interested. I can follow Kalen Deboer. And he has a lot more options now where it's, all right, I'm really curious about this. Let me see what that might look like now that, this world of the transfer portal has just kind of changed college football.
Yeah, I think my, my next observation and just based on watching this team and just how good of a season Penix had, how much of this do you think was Deboer versus, Penix just being one of the best quarterbacks in college football?
So that's a really fun debate where I feel like you don't even just have to stop it right there. Where Kalen and Ryan Grubb definitely did their part with instituting a fantastic system. Michael Penix does some unbelievable things, obviously. But then you can also look at the skill players around Michael Penix, too, where Dylan Johnson was unbelievable this season. Rome Odunze is one of my favorite players to watch in the country. Yeah. Jalen McMillan. Jalen Polk went for 1,000 yards this season. The offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, where it was just a little bit of this is all the perfect recipe of scheme plus talent plus a supporting cast that really is what made this work more than anything else.
Yeah, and that checks out because that is coaching, just having the right guys out there and having the ability to put a roster out there that is solid at every level, and having the ability to kind of work with those guys and make everybody work as a unit. So yeah, it was really impressive to see what he did, even last year into this year. So go ahead, Sam.
To kind of piggyback on that, I'm a Bears fan, and we have the first pick, obviously, and the 9th pick. And one of the guys I'm looking at number 9 is Rome Odunze. I think I watched maybe 4 or 5 Washington games this year, and every single game he really jumped out. Give us a scouting report, not only on him, but I'm also curious on. We just talked about Penix. Obviously, after that game against Texas, a lot of people are saying, "Why isn't this guy being considered to be drafted way up high?" Do you you established yourself as a Patriots fan? Do you think he has a game that can translate to the professional level?
Absolutely. Where I just think that he needs to be in the right system when you talk about Michael Penix at the next level, where I know teams are going to have questions about his age. I know teams are going to have questions about his injury history. But outside of that, when you look at what he's able to do, he should be considered one of the best quarterback prospects in this class. Where I know I love listening to Ben Solak over at The Ringer, where he poses a good question about him, working the middle of the field a little bit more, where I feel like a little bit of that has to do with the scheme that Washington put out there with the receivers that they have. It's just a lot easier to throw a goal ball to Odunze down the sidelines than a lot of other things. But I feel that just his IQ, his ability to read the field, and his ability to make so many tough throws like we saw in the Sugar Bowl, that it should, no matter where he gets drafted, he's going to thrive. I just think that it's going to be a matter of putting the right system around him before we see that happen. Where, one spot that I'm looking at him for him is the Minnesota Vikings. Where I think that'd be a fantastic landing spot for him because you've got a good offensive line. You've got a couple of nice receivers in Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, where if you put some kind of cast like that around him, then that'll really help get the most out of Michael Penix, and not to mention Kevin O'Connell's scheme as well up there.
Yeah. And Sonny brought up an interesting point there. And with the breakdown of Penix and, I also, have a Cheesy Corn Sports. It's a fantasy football channel. And so I do a lot of just breakdowns on film on these guys. Yeah. My buddy's a Packers fan and I was a Nebraska fan. And we're like, just mash those together, whatever.
Hey, that's fun.
Yeah, but one of the things you mentioned that you said was more of scheme was kind of that middle of the field, and I think that's where his biggest deficiency was kind of his accuracy towards the middle of the field too, just kind of in that mid to intermediate a little bit. He's good on the short stuff, good on the long stuff, but a little bit hit or miss on the in between. And also to Sonny's point, how much of that do you think was just? We have it every cycle where with these quarterbacks, like a Zach Wilson will fly up the boards, just because he's the hot story, because he's throwing some balls in shorts. How much of do you think this was recency bias where people were just kind of shoving him up the draft boards, ahead of a lot of these guys? And how much of do you think it was legitimate, and where around do you think he should fall in that quarterback range?
So I think there's a legit argument to be made for him around. It's tough when you get up because obviously the top two guys are in their own tier.
Yep.
Caleb Williams, Drake May are their own tier. I'm very intrigued by the prospect of Jaden Daniels, but there are things that give me pause about him, mainly just his size concerns and a couple of things where people are questioning Michael Penix's age. It's like Jaden Daniels has been in school 5 years as well.
Yeah.
Or I know Penix, all of his deficiencies when it comes to his age were due to 4 season-ending injuries.
Yeah.
So I would say you can put him right there in that QB3, QB4 range where I'm not a huge fan of Bo Nix at the pro level. JJ McCarthy, I was not impressed by the national championship game. They won the game and he made I don't want to sound too harsh here, but he made one nice throw and everything else was just easy completions. And so you see and from that one throw, you see, okay, yeah, this is what NFL teams like. This is what they want. But I think when you look at Michael Penix, yeah, you're not necessarily seeing the mobility that a lot of teams are after nowadays. But you see a guy with an arm that's as strong as anybody's that can fit the ball into some really tight windows. And when he's on, he has the potential to be a top 5, top 10 quarterback in the league. I'm not saying that it's ever going to necessarily reach that level because there are a lot of other factors at play. But that's kind of what his ceiling could be if everything goes right.
Yeah, and it's kind of like similar to CJ Stroud, for instance. Like CJ Stroud, he's accurate with the deep ball. Houston Texans lead in explosive plays. But not only that, it's, he doesn't run very much. He's capable of it. And, these dual threat guys are they're taking over the NFL basically, but you still got, you got a guy like CJ Stroud, who's basically a pocket quarterback coming in there and being the best one in the draft class. I definitely do see a lane where Penix can fall into that after a little bit of development for sure.
So, sorry, Justin, one other thing that I wanted to add in there is you talked about it being like a little bit of recency bias, where I don't necessarily think that's where it is. Because if you go turn on the tape for 2022, you're seeing a lot of the same things. He just dialed it in even more this past year, where it's just, especially if you go and you combine just the last 2 years of tape, you'd see that, okay, yeah, no, this is just who Michael Penix is. And in the right system, you can certainly get the most out of him. I'm sorry, Sonny, go ahead.
No, and one sorry, okay, I'm okay. Before I get flamed by Washington fans, I want to make sure that it was a recency bias after the national championship where people were kind of just thrusting them up. So I just don't want Washington fans to burn me for that one. So Sonny, go ahead.
I just didn't want us to gloss over the fact, just in case that the Bears management is watching this game episode, which I'm absolutely sure that they're going to be. Give us a scouting report on Rome Odunze as well for that number 9 pick.
Rome Odunze is not only is he one of my favorite players to watch, like I said a couple of minutes ago, he's just also one of my favorite people to talk to in this class. He's a really wonderful kid, very mature, very humble, and outside of that, he's just an absolute monster on the football field. Kalen Deboer told our buddy Christian Capel over at on Montlake back in the summer that he was running a 4.36, 4.37 40-yard dash. He's 6'3". He can run every route that you need him to. He's established himself as becoming way more physical at the catch point. And just in any other wide receiver class, truly, unless you look at maybe Jamar Chase in 2021, he'd probably be considered the wide receiver 1. And it's just, you have to contend with a guy like Marvin Harrison, who I just think is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. I really do think that I love Malik Nabers. I think he's another awesome receiver, but Rome deserves more mention in that same tier that some people have started to move Malik Nabers into, because I have a feeling that we're going to see Rome Odunze get to the combine. And Justin, like you said earlier, once we see these guys do things in shorts, it's whoa, why weren't we talking more about this? We're going to see that where Rome Odunze is going to run a sub 4.4 and everybody's going to be like, wait, why aren't we talking more about this guy? It's like, well, you should have just paid a little more attention to the Pac-12.
Exactly. Yeah. Watch a little bit more game tape. Moving it a little bit more into the focus of Jedd Fisch. So, like we mentioned before, it's just a great for a 2-day turnaround. It was an amazing hire, right? And I guess, I was asked a grade for it, right? And I guess to grade this properly, you kind of need to know what are the expectations. So what are the expectations for Jedd Fisch? What is considered success, next season and then going forward? Is like the standard in Alabama is national championships. Right. The standard in Washington isn't necessarily that, but what do you think it kind of is going forward from coming off of this season?
So that's a really good question, because moving into the Big Ten, that's going to be some uncharted territory for Washington. When I look at the schedule, depending on how the roster shapes out, being the big thing, I can easily find 8 or 9 wins on that schedule. The tough games being Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, USC, those being the toughest ones. Yeah, Illinois. I don't. Do they play each other this year?
I thought they play in Seattle this year. I could be confusing.
I think that might be 2025, because I know they've played Northwestern. But when I look at up and down the schedule, I say, okay, I can see a bunch of wins here. The question is, A, what's the roster going to look like? Because we've seen what Jedd Fisch can do with his scheme. And I think it all just kind of comes back to the bar has been raised. Something Chris Peterson said after Washington lost to Alabama in the 2016 Peach Bowl, where he said the bar has been raised. And now Kalen Deboer has raised the bar again, where there's a whole lot of interest surrounding this team right now. You can say what you will about Kalen leaving, maybe killing some of that, but there's still a lot of interest around this team. Mm-hmm. So I think that the expectation now is, all right, well, especially with the expanded playoff, if, you get a break here, you get a break there, maybe you see guys like Noah Fafita and Tyrell McMillan transfer into Washington, that would raise the bar even more. Where, you look at some of the other Arizona transfers that are in the portal right now, guys like Jonah Coleman, Pichins Prysock, and then Takario Davis, the other cornerback as well, where, you add a couple of guys like that to Washington's roster and get an offensive line, where you can definitely see, okay, yeah, maybe 8-9 wins is not out of the realm of possibilities. And then you can say, okay, yeah, there's an outside shot that maybe they find a 10th win. Maybe they're able to sneak in as an 11 or a 12 seed in the college football playoff, where I think it's just going to kind of, because that's one of the things that Jedd Fisch said in his opening press conference, where he said, I believe that Washington is one of the 12 or 14 teams that can compete for a national championship every single year.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think, going into what you mentioned, going into the Big Ten next year, a coming off of this national championship, how much has, or if it has at all, the perspective changed on, how successful these Pac-12 teams will be coming into the Big Ten, coming off of that game? Is there any worry because of how that game shaped out with the top of the top, or is it just kind of like Michigan was just that good this year? So what's the overall feeling? Do you feel like they're the Pac-12 teams are gonna have to adjust more than the Big Ten teams? What's your take on that?
I think it was just Michigan, especially their defense was that good, where especially after we saw those 2 early touchdowns, Washington's defense really honed it in, really got it right. And, some of these rumors about Kalen Deboer interviewing before the national championship for the Alabama job are true, but just kind of amplifies maybe there were a couple of other things going on that might have influenced it, where we saw Washington hang with some of the best of the best. We saw them hang with Texas. Everybody thought Oregon was a far superior team. Washington beat them twice this year. So I don't think it's necessarily about one having to adjust, because we saw Oregon beat Ohio State a couple of years ago. That was a really good Ohio State team, where we've seen all of these things happen. I think that the Big Ten might actually need to adjust to what this Pac-12 style is a little bit more, where, you get a Lincoln Riley. What's that?
You sound like Scott Frost when he came over to Nebraska. He was like, the Big Ten's going to have to adjust to us, and that didn't happen.
Oh, that's yeah. So when we look at the offense that Jedd Fisch is bringing with him, we look at what Will Stein and Dan Lanning are doing at Oregon. We look at Lincoln Riley at USC, where we see some of these more pass-heavy offenses. We might need to see a little bit of adjustment to that. From not necessarily the Michigans, the Ohio States of the world, the Iowas, the Wisconsins. And then on the other side of that, there's definitely going to be an adjustment to playing in Iowa in November. Let's be real about that. Or that's also going to be an adjustment for some of these Pac-12 teams. So I feel that there's going to be a healthy mix of both, but we're going to see a lot of competitive football.
Does part of you think, sorry, Sonny, just to bounce off of that. Does part of you think that Jedd Fisch may have an advantage coming to the Big Ten just because he has the experience there being Michigan's OC for a couple of years? Do you think he has the advantage over a guy like Deboer, in this transition because of that?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't say that. Where we've seen so much from Deboer over the last couple of years where, I'm not saying this is the same team. I love to take a Michigan State jab where I can. It's not like, their defense was any good for the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But we've seen him compete with Big Ten teams. And we've seen him beat the brakes off of them 2 years in a row. So I think it's just more of a, when we look at Jedd Fisch, it's a similar style where there are going to be a lot of things about his offense, and I think everybody's going to be really impressed by. For anybody who wasn't watching Arizona this year, because, for a top 10 team, they really kind of did fly under the radar for a majority of the season. So
they flew under the radar in Arizona too.
Yeah, they really did. But they're a super impressive team. If you go back and watch their film, you'd say, oh yeah, there are a whole lot of things to like here. So I think that, he's going to do a lot of fun things. And I'm just like, the thing I'm most curious about is just the personnel. Because if the personnel is there, I think that this scheme can be run at a very high level.
Gotcha.
Speaking of a high level, we're kind of talking about how Washington's going to mix in with the Big Ten. Obviously, it's an end of an era. The Pac-12 is now done, and that's kind of what we all grew up watching, all the major conferences. What's your mood excitement like? Are you excited to be playing the Michigans, the Penn States, the Ohio States, and you're bringing some of your friends with you, obviously, so you'll have some familiar faces. But are you kind of excited for the future of not only Washington football, but where college football is headed in general?
Absolutely. So there's something to be said for tradition, right? When, something like the Apple Cup, I'm really glad to see that continue. I'm really glad to not have to go down to Arizona or Arizona State anymore, because that was just always just madness. That was a mess every time that had to happen. Battles with Utah, that's a really fun team to watch under Kyle Whittingham. But I'm really excited about that, because the biggest thing that we have to think about in this day and age, it's you either sink or you swim. That's why, I've seen a lot of Arizona fans just as mad as Jedd Fisch. Yeah, Jedd Fisch as, Washington fans are at Kalen Deboer. And as unfortunate as it is, that's just the sink or swim, just whatever you want to call it, that mentality of this era of college football. So I would say that, from the perspective of somebody who's watched this Washington team his whole life and somebody who's just enjoys college football, that it's exciting to be able to take trips to Michigan, to Ohio State, to Penn State, to see all of these things. But at the same time, yeah, you got to take a second, just be like, man, it sucks that we don't get to see this anymore. But in the ever evolving landscape of college football, you just kind of have to adapt to it and just have fun with what you can.
Got it. Sonny?
So Roman, I'm curious. So when I started watching college football, Washington was won the national championship the first year I started watching college football. So I've always had, let's just say, a soft spot for them. It's a team I always kind of passively was paying attention to on the side. I'm going to ask you a question, which I've been hearing debates over, whether it's on shows, talk shows, Twitter, social media, and I'm really curious on what you think. So I'm going to give you a statement and you fill in the blank. All right. Washington is a top blank program in the country.
That's a fantastic question. I thought you were going to go with is Washington a blue blood route, which that would have been an interesting one too. Yeah, I can't with where they've been since 2000.
Blue bloods, in my opinion, are set in stone because they are like the fabric of the traditional college football. Sonny, you're never Illinois. All right, I digress. Roman, go ahead.
So I would say top 20, where even if you look at just before the Kalen Deboer era, they were still a top 20 program. The biggest thing that you need is just interest and buy-in. And Justin, you talked a little about Troy Dannon earlier on. Troy Dannon is the guy running the ship as the athletic director, who is doing a fantastic job with that because he's got a whole lot of buy-in from donors, from, just the way he was able to go out and hire Jedd Fisch. And, I would say, all things considered, if everything is going right, and let's say Kalen Deboer was able to sustain the success that he had here in 2023 for 2-3 more years, that it would probably move in the top 10 to 15 range, where when it's the thing of Washington, Oregon fans get into this debate all the time. But if everything is going right at Washington, it's no debate that it might even be just as big as USC.
All right. And I guess my last question here, just for Jedd Fisch and the program overall from here moving forward, let's do a 5 and 10 year kind of mark. What do you think Washington looks like in those timeframes? And is Jedd Fisch successful? At the end of the day, at the 5-year mark, 10-year mark, is he still at Washington? Is he successful? How do you feel like that's going to go? Just, I know it's hard to hammer that down, but just in your opinion, what looks successful to you?
So the first question is, if he's still there in 10 years, I don't want to say I'm shocked, but, especially with everything, he's going to leave after 2 or 3 years. There's a whole big debate of, this is really only a second stint as a head coach.
Yeah.
So, maybe he finds some success and wants to stay around a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But I would say if you can just find ways to be consistently ranked in the top 15, top 20 every single year, win 9 games, win 10 games, because I feel that's very possible. Because the first thing that Troy Dannon said he was looking for when he went out for a coach was a maniacal recruiter. And that's something that at Washington, we haven't seen in a long time. Mm-hmm. Where you can look at Chris Peterson's last couple of classes that were the foundation of this national championship run, where you got Troy Fautano, Roger Rosengarten, Braylon Trice, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, the list goes on and on and on. Peterson did that at a really high level for 2.5 years and said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Jedd Fisch doesn't seem like he's that kind of guy. Yeah. So I would say that finding a way to win 8, 9, 10 games every year would be, I would say, what I expect, plus finding a way to get, I don't want to go with top 10 because there are other schools that are, I would say, a little bit more focused on that than Washington is. But if you can say top 15, top 20 recruiting classes, because that's what we saw get them to the national championship, top 20 classes. So I would say if you can do that for a couple of years, build on the success that you've seen, plus bringing in some guys from Arizona to kind of bridge that gap so there's not like a big fall off before they come back up. If you can do that I would say that he's going to have a very large amount of success in Washington.
Yeah, that and you mentioned the recruiting there. That's a couple of things he did well at Arizona. Is there's a lot of talent here in Arizona, and he started to really focus on that 500-mile radius and really start to get some of these guys from in-state and pay dividends. And he also has a lot of West Coast connections, and possibly some Big Ten connections just based on his coaching history. So. Roman, anything else you want to touch on in regards to this before we
actually, yeah, I got one little last thing on that recruiting bit where people have said, oh, well, why aren't his recruiting classes ranked super high? Where he didn't necessarily have, like I said a little bit earlier, all the resources to do so at Arizona, that Washington has shown a commitment very early on that they're willing to give him whatever it takes to succeed.
Yeah, Arizona's
and that's
like that.
Exactly. And, being $240 million in the hole isn't necessarily a great place to be either. But with all of those things that Washington is able to provide, with a huge assistant coach salary pool, with a very large commitment to NIL, I'm just really intrigued to see how this plays out, because he's shown an ability to develop talent. And one thing I asked him at his press conference the other day was, I asked him, how do you tie in all your years of success in the NFL to what you're doing here? And he said, well, that's what we sell. Like, that's our biggest thing. Like, I was in an NFL draft room for 14 years. So I know exactly what it is that these guys are looking for kids that play on Sundays.
Yep.
So that's what I'm able to sell on people.
Yep.
And we've seen him do a really, really good job of that during his time in Arizona. And I feel that Washington has the perfect mix of development plus commitment to recruiting and, improvement with this move to the Big Ten, that it's just going to be a very good match for Jedd Fisch.
Yeah, and I think the NFL experience really flies under the radar. Listening to most of Dylan Raiola's, as a Nebraska fan, a lot of his interviews, and one of the things that I hear him say, almost more than anything, besides like the support of the program, is Matt Rule and staff's NFL ties. We went and got Clint Thomas as a co-OC QB coach, and he mentioned his NFL experience. And a lot of these guys, like, that's the reason they go to some of these coaching staffs in these schools, is because these guys, they want to play at the next level and they know the guys that can get them there. So yeah, that can't be understated for sure.
Absolutely.
Sonny, anything else?
Nope, I'm good. I did check, Roman. Yeah, we come to Seattle in 2025. So you were correct.
Okay.
Awesome.
That's what I thought. I hate that I have that memorized.
Like a quarter of my family's from Seattle. They're big Washington fans, so I'll probably be out there for a couple of games, and whenever we play also.
That's what I like to hear.
Yep. So I'll definitely hit you up when we are, though. So
please do.
Right. Yep, absolutely, man. Sonny's not right now. It's fine. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and sign off here. Roman, again, I really appreciate your time. You taking the time to get on here. Anything coming up on your channels that you want to plug before we sign off or anything like that?
We're just updating every single day of the week. Feel free to subscribe to Locked On Huskies. Feel free to check out UW Huskies Wire, where we're going to be, again, updating with every content every single day. So just be on the lookout for all that. Justin, Sonny, I really do appreciate you guys having me on.
Likewise, man. And, links will be in the description. So for all of his stuff. So if y'all want to support him, please go down there and click those links. And Sonny, anything from you before we go off? Anything for Roman? Any last
Roman, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll get to reconnect soon on the Big Ten show.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know if you wanted to fire some shots off at the hip there at the end, Sonny, on the way out. But all right,
we're friends now. We're in the same conference.
Exactly. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the Big Ten show. We appreciate everybody's support here. If you don't mind, if you like what we do, please like and subscribe. It really helps us out. YouTube doesn't like us otherwise. So, but comment, let us know your thoughts and stuff like that. And we will see you in the next installment of the Big Ten show. Peace.